My guest today on Creative Inspired Happy is Allegra Goodman, New York Times bestselling author of many books, including Sam and, more recently, Isola. Allegra's books have also been a National Book Award finalist, a Reese's Book Club pick, and a Read with Jenna Today Show pick. Today, we talk about what Allegra would do if she won a book shopping spree, how reading has influenced the way she writes, why writing in third person or first person changes the experience for both the author and the reader, writing historical fiction in a way that resonates with contemporary readers, whether celebrity book club endorsements has changed the way Allegra thinks about the audience for her books, a recent book she's read that has surprised her and delighted her, and so much more. Creative Inspired Happy is a video podcast featuring interviews with brilliant, fun authors about what made them fall in love with stories, why they write, their biggest successes and disappointments, and of course, their latest books. All hosted by me, New York Times bestselling author Evelyn Skye. Join our warm community for free to get behind-the-scenes insights about author life, book recommendations, the opportunity to ask questions of upcoming podcast guests, and more. Just go to creativeinspiredhappy.com or follow the link in the episode notes. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Allegra. Welcome to Creative Inspired Happy. I'm so happy to have you on the show. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
So I know you're a huge reader, and we're going to talk about the books that you've written. But first, I thought I'd kind of give you a fun question to kick us off, loosen us up for this podcast. And that is, if you were given a $500 gift certificate to go on a shopping spree in a bookstore, how would you go about choosing which books? And let's say there's a half-hour time limit.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to be in a really good bookstore, like with a lot of good selection, Golly, what would I do? I think I would go and get some I would get some good hardbacks that are newly published that might be very expensive, like that I might not ordinarily get. Like I was recently browsing at Harvard Bookstore in Cambridge, and I saw that Daniel Mendelsohn has a new translation of the Odyssey out. It was like on the new table, so I'd go for books like that, yes, I have like 3 or 4 translations at home, but I want to see what he has to say about it and how he would do it. So I'd look for poetry. I'd look for plays. I might get some scholarly books as well, some nonfiction. Yeah, I'd probably go for like the juicy hardbacks that newly published.
I love that. I'm always drawn to those, displays at the front of the store, and I know that I should be browsing elsewhere as well. But I think that the booksellers, especially at really great bookstores, they do such a nice job of curating those books for us. And if you frequent a store often enough, you get to know, the little cards, the bookshelf talkers.
Yes.
You get to know each of the booksellers and like, oh, I like that person's taste, and so I love it.
Picks. I go for the staff picks.
Yes. All right. So because you are a big reader, I'm also curious how reading has influenced you as a writer. Have you learned from reading? Have you always been a reader? And how has that influenced your career?
I think definitely. I was a voracious reader as a child, and pretty young, when I was 12 or 13, I started reading these Victorian novels. I got really into Charles Dickens. And actually, it's funny about the gift certificate, but my dad gave me as a gift the complete works of Dickens. In beautiful edition, leather bound and everything, and which I still have on my shelf. And I read a lot of them when I was a kid. And then in high school and in early college, I was also reading a lot of George Eliot, Jane Austen, Anthony Trollope, and those, particularly those 19th century novels, which would be novels not just about one person or like a slice of life, but about an entire community or like a whole network of plots. Tolstoy was one of my favorites. And that definitely influenced me and inspired me as a novelist.
I'm actually reading War and Peace or rereading War and Peace right now. So, Tolstoy.
Oh, yeah, the best.
And you were a literature major actually as an undergrad. And also, did you do literature as your PhD?
Yeah, English literature, yes.
And so were you writing at the same time, or were you mostly studying the works of others?
I was writing at the same time. So I was in college. I did a lot of like 17th century English poetry. I studied Milton with Barbara Lewalski and did a lot of sort of classics. But I was writing at the time sort of these very contemporary satirical short stories that were very different in tone and time and place. And in graduate school, I mostly studied Shakespeare and 18th century literature and history of criticism. But I was again writing short stories and writing very contemporary fiction. So there was kind of this disconnect between what I was reading and what I was writing. And I've always also been really interested in studying plays. And so in college, like one of my favorite courses was a play on a course on George Bernard Shaw's plays. So yeah, I guess I read in different genres than what I'm writing.
Has studying plays and poetry like influenced or impacted how you write your own fiction? Or is it more kind of a separate realm where there's reader Allegra and then there's writer Allegra?
I think everything sort of impacts, although maybe not directly. I think with plays, there is a direct impact in that I'm really interested in how tightly plotted plays have to be. When you're a fiction writer and you're reading a play, you'll notice that in the play there's sort of no wasted words and incidents. Like everything has to count because there's only a limited time and space to get everything done. And I've always been very interested in the tightness of work in the theater, and and I use that as inspiration and as a lesson for me to be a little more disciplined as a fiction writer.
Do you think that I'm actually curious? This is not something I'd scripted before, but since you're talking about the pacing and the way that things are plotted in plays, do you find them different than modern movies?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it depends on the period of the play and that kind of thing, right? Well, plays just have so many more words in them. Their movies are by nature visual, right? So the storytelling in a movie is it's a moving picture. And so you'll learn more from just sort of the glance of the character or the close up on the face often than what they will actually say. A picture's worth 1,000 words. While plays are very voice based and talky by nature, especially the plays that I used to like to read, by Shaw or Shakespeare, where the character would tell his or her thoughts to the audience. They have those monologues and those speeches. So there's some really big differences there.
Yeah, okay. I can definitely see how that would actually maybe translate a little bit better
Yeah.
to writing a novel than a movie, because I feel like nowadays there's a lot of advice for aspiring writers or even for established writers to follow the Hollywood movie kind of plot structure. And
Mhm.
I think that reflects kind of the audience's preferences for pacing or short attention spans. But I love this idea of coming back to plays because they are actually more word based. And I don't
Yeah.
know about you, but the thing I love about writing, like I don't actually consider myself a storyteller first because
Mm.
I like words. And so if you told me that I could tell stories but I couldn't use words anymore, I don't think I'd be terribly
Mhm.
interested. I don't know.
Mhm.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I am a storyteller and my medium is words.
I love that. I like
um
that.
yeah, yeah. And I would also say that from a very early, and this may also reflect my interest in sort of plays and theater, my earliest work was really based on voices and dialogue. That was sort of the heart of what I did. I was less interested in sort of descriptions of the setting or talking about the sunset or that kind of thing. um, and and so I really began with dialogue. And one thing you mentioned Tolstoy and how you're rereading War and Peace. One thing that Tolstoy is so good with, in addition to dialogue where the characters are in words expressing themselves, he is very good at describing that nonverbal communication that people have in conversations where she said that, but her eye, she looked away as she said that, or like, he describes people's gestures. And I think that he's so masterful at that, that talking about communication in its visual and verbal forms.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important skill to have as a writer. And it's difficult to do too, because sometimes I get stuck in just help heart palpitations. And then I think, how many times can my protagonist's heart skip a beat, you know?
Yeah,
But yeah, rereading
totally.
Tolstoy really is kind of a master class in that. Okay, so I really want to make sure we spend time talking about your new book, which we talked about the pronunciation beforehand, and I already forgot. Is it Isola?
Isola, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that story.
So Isla is a historical novel based on the true story of a young woman who sailed to the New World from France in 1542 against her will, and ended up marooned on an island in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a very chilly island, I should add. This is a subarctic climate, and this is known to have happened. They know that she sailed. They know she was marooned. Nobody knows exactly how she survived, or how she how she managed. And when I first heard about this story, I was just captivated by it. And because there is so little known about exactly why she was sailing to the new world, what her relationship was with the man who marooned her, um, what she was thinking and feeling when she was on that island, to me that gave me a lot of space to do the work of imagination and fill that out in a novel.
So this is based on a real character. Is the character in Isola also that true character, or did you kind of just were you just inspired by that?
So I tried to use the facts that are known about her. That her name was Marguerite de la Roque de Roberval, and she was a noblewoman, and she was pretty famous in her own time. And there were two contemporary accounts of her ordeal, and but the accounts conflict a little bit. One of them's by the Queen of Navarre, who included her story in a collection of stories that she wrote, and the other one is by a priest who said that he interviewed her.
Oh,
But they conflict with each other a little bit.
th-
And both of the contemporary accounts of what she went through are only about 2 pages long. So there are some details there that I tried to, spring off of, but again, a lot of space to work with.
oh, that's so interesting. Okay, so Marguerite, she starts out as being the heiress to a chateau
Yeah,
and vast lands, and then she's orphaned, I believe, and then taken
yeah,
under the wing of this man who we don't know much about. But then they end up marooned on this island, and
yeah.
there her
He's
life, so
marooned.
her life is completely different. And since you had so much space in the historical record to play with, how did you envision this kind of transformation of the character from nobility
Yeah.
to a survivalist?
Yeah, exactly. So she is a woman. She's so privileged in her old life that she had servants surrounding her. She probably never even dressed herself, let alone used a knife, or went hunting, or tried to gather firewood. She had never done anything for herself. And I really thought of this again. Back to the reading. I've always been really captivated by stories of castaways, and I thought of it as a female Robinson Crusoe. Um, with the difference that, unlike Robinson Crusoe, she's a woman who had never really done much for herself. She'd never shot a gun, you know. Um, she had never gone fishing, um, and so for me, it was like a challenge and an opportunity, and just very exciting to just try to think my way through it. And what I came up with was that she was really tested on this island, not just physically and in terms of practical terms, where she could have totally frozen in the winter and she could have been eaten by animals, and or died of starvation if she couldn't find enough food, but also that she would be tested spiritually by this experience, because she's somebody who has never you know experience this kind of loss or isolation, and that she ends up on this island. She doesn't start out alone, but she ends up alone there. And to me, the heart of the book is when she really is alone, and she has alone with her thoughts, and she has to kind of figure out if she want not only how she can keep on going, but if she wants to keep on going, with no end in sight, with no prospect of being saved.
How do you get so deeply immersed in the psychology of a character like that? And does it affect you in your day to day life when you've walked away from your computer?
I think I sort of imagine myself more and more inside of her. Like when you're writing a novel, and this is true of I think many novels, you find like a little opening, and then you kind of get yourself inside and you keep working your way in as you go. So it's a gradual process to imagine yourself inside a world, or inside a world like this, and inside a psyche like this. And it takes time. So I spent many years sort of thinking about her before writing the story. So I had already begun to imagine her before I tried writing any words. And then the process of writing the first draft was about 18 months, and then I did a revision for about a year. So it was that gradual process of living with her every day, as I was writing. And that's one of the big differences between writing a long novel and maybe writing a very short piece that might take you a few hours or, or maybe a few days.
Yeah, it's really fascinating the patience that's required to write such long form work. I noticed that in the author's note, you had mentioned that at some point during your research, you had gotten really interested in a tidbit about Marguerite and about polar bears, so fighting off polar bears.
Hmm.
And so, unless you haven't told me yet that you have experience surviving in the Arctic, I want to know how you learned about these survival techniques or how she managed to carry on in such harsh conditions, especially given her background. But even for anybody who might
Yeah.
have, I mean, I don't know, I would be dead, honestly.
Well, I did a lot of research for the book, and a lot of my research had to do with just understanding her period and what she would be wearing and what she would be eating and what her chateau would look like. But I also did research on the natural world, and I did a lot of research on polar bears and how they hunt and how they would go about that and what it might be like to experience an attack by polar bears. And there are places in Alaska where you don't go without a gun, just in case, because polar bears are now, with change of habitat, encroaching on places that they didn't used to go. And so I did research about that and thought about it. And the whole time that I was doing this research, though, I was just trying to think through her eyes how strange and terrifying it must be not to be a scientist studying polar bears who is expecting certain behaviors, but to be somebody who had never seen a bear that was completely white, that everything there is new to her, that when she sees the birds on this island who hunt for fish, she doesn't know the names of these birds. She's never seen this species before. So how people talk about like having a beginner's mind or a child's mind. I think when you get inside a character, you have to have the mind of that character, that and explore the newness of an experience and convey that to the reader. So that's sort of what I was going for there.
Yeah, I really like how you can make it personal to your protagonist because you're putting yourself in her shoes. I'm curious
Yeah.
about your methods of research as you're looking at like historical research or this kind of what polar bears are like or what Arctic conditions are like. What do you like to do in your research? Do you reach out to experts? Because I know people who go out and they hang out with the experts in whatever field. Or are you more of an archival, go to the library sort of person, or do you just do internet research?
I think really all of the above. I've done all of these things. I do a lot of going to the library and a lot of collecting books on the subject, and I do a lot of internet research. I had an email exchange with Emma Donahue, who's a wonderful novelist and also has written historical novels. And we talked. It turns out we both like to look at YouTube videos where you can like look at a YouTube video of somebody who will explain how he loads a musket, from this period and
Oh.
how he shoots it. So that kind of information is very useful for a novelist. And then in the past, I've definitely gone to experts. When I wrote a novel called Intuition about scientists, I went to laboratories and followed scientists around to see how they were doing their experiments and how they worked with the mice that they were experimenting on. So I would say it's archival and experiential.
That's so fascinating. As an introvert, it's so hard for me to think about reaching out to an expert and saying, "Hey, can I follow you around all day?"
Yeah.
So I actually have a couple questions from our community for you, because Creative Inspired Happy is not just a podcast; we're also a community of readers and writers, and I let them know ahead of time who's coming onto the show. So Amy B had a couple of questions for you, and the first one was, how do you shift a narrative voice? So in Isola, you have Marguerite going from an heiress to a survivor. And then,
Mhm.
for example, in a Sam, your last novel, you had a 7-year-old who then progressed into becoming a teenager as the story went on. So, what do you take into account when you're crafting the voice of your protagonists as they develop in your stories?
That's such an interesting question. Such a good question. I really think I try to take myself into their minds and think in the terms that they think, not in my terms. I try to disappear and become that person. So with Sam, who is this young girl, the book starts when she's 7 years old. When she's 7, the book is not written in the first person. It's sort of this intimate third person, but I only use words that she would know, that like I didn't impose my vocabulary on this child. And then as she grew up in the book, her voice shifts because she knows more and she has learned more and her mind has expanded. And, so her vocabulary and diction become more complex and her voice evolves in the book. And I was just really interested in doing that. Again, I guess this also returns to my interest in, reading plays and thinking about voice and theater. I really think of my work is almost like a performance where I'm performing that character. So with Marguerite, who's a very different character in a different time and place from Sam, I really tried to think, how would she say it? How would she tell her story? Not how I would tell her story, but how she would tell her story. And so perform her role, inhabit her role as an actor might do. The weird thing about it is that I wrote the two books at the same time. So this one very contemporary where this girl just talks like us, set in the 21st century, and this other book in the 16th century, this noble woman. And I would write one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So to extend the theatrical metaphor, it's a bit like being in repertory.
Wow.
With
Wow.
these
And how
different
did
roles.
you keep from getting confused about the characters or their feelings when you're embodying them so deeply?
I think honestly they're so different that I was able to, move from one to the other. I think of it more as like time travel. Sort of get in my time machine, which is imaginary, and, parachute into the island with Marguerite.
I love that. I feel like being in your head is a really fun place.
Can be.
All right. So you mentioned writing Sam in a close, intimate third person. That was actually Amy B's second question for you, which was how do you choose which perspective that you're using? How do you know I want third person in this story? And do you try on different POVs or did you try first person first and then decide no, it's third?
I did not try a different one. I envisioned that book in this very close third person, and I think I did it really because I wanted the reader to have a little bit of distance from Sam where we can be watching her, where we have more information than she does. So we are not the child. We are right there with her in the scene. We are with her in her experience, but we also are not the child. And that little bit of distance allows for some irony, some humor, um, for the reader to do the work of piecing together some things that Sam might not know yet. Um, with Marguerite, I always envisioned that book in the first person because I wanted it again to be like a Robinson Crusoe sort of book where she's telling her story as a survivor, and Robinson Crusoe is in the first person. So I wanted her to tell it, and it allowed me, writing in the first person allowed me not to over explain too much, because if you are telling your own story, you are not tempted as much to be like a historian of the time or teach the reader a lesson about how people lived. Like if you were to tell your story now, you wouldn't be like, and let me explain to you that we had two houses in Congress, at the time, and so was the president of the United States. You would just be like the president, like you would assume certain knowledge on the part of your listener or your reader. And writing in the first person allowed me to do that, and it prevented me from overtelling.
Okay. So since Marguerite's in the past, but your readers are obviously right now modern, and then you were writing Sam at the same time, which was a contemporary story. I guess my question really is how do you write a historical fiction piece that still resonates with contemporary readers? And then the ancillary question to that is did writing Sam at the same time, since it was in modern day, help you create that kind of connection?
Hmm. I always felt like historical fiction resonates because it's like a parable. Like, you can look at some of the struggles that Marguerite goes through, for example, with her guardian and with the culture, which was so misogynistic. And you can say, oh, on the one hand, thank God, like I'm a woman now and I don't have to put up with certain things that she has to put up with. On the other hand, you can also say, oh, some of this sounds familiar to me. Some of this behavior that she's dealing with it has not changed as much as it should have changed in the intervening time. And I find that very interesting and very resonant. Her position as a woman, um, the class stratification that she has to deal with. Some of this seems foreign and some of it seems all too familiar. Um, in terms of Sam, it's funny. Sam is set, sort of in the early 2000s, and it is almost historical now too, right? Like so much has happened since
I really
then.
don't like to think about it that way. It doesn't sound like
Right,
that
right.
long
It's
ago.
terrible to think about. It's terrible to think about. And sometimes I've taught actually, undergraduates, and I had this one undergraduate who said, "I want to write a historical novel set in like the 2010s," and I was like, "Okay, I am a dinosaur." So it's interesting to think, at some level, all novels are historical novels. One thing that really helped me because I did feel a little intimidated by writing at first to write a book set so far in the past. One thing that I told myself, and I still believe, is that the thing is that people in the past don't think of themselves in the past. They live in the present. They are not people who lived in the old days. They are modern people living in modern times. And if you think of it that way, and everything is new for them, everything is the first time for them, that helps you and it helps the reader.
Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Okay, if you could go back in time, speaking of back then, and give advice to younger Allegra, who's a writer, what advice would you give, knowing what you know now?
Well, I would tell myself that writing requires a lot of patience. And that was something I didn't know when I was young. I didn't really quite understand how much revision I was going to have to do on my work, or how slow and careful the process of writing a novel was going to be. But I would tell myself not to get frustrated and to learn to slow down. I think as a young writer, my tendency was always to rush. And one of the reasons I liked writing short stories when I was very young was that they were small. You could get to the end, like you could say what you wanted to say faster. It was sort of more immediate gratification. And I still advise young writers to work on short fiction for that reason. It's just great. It's great to do something where you get results. But I have learned over time as I've gotten older, and I still remind myself all the time just to slow down and not to rush. That novels work better, at least for me, if they are done gradually. There's no like writing it in a week. There's no like, you can take a month and just churn it out. That for me, that doesn't work. It's that slow process of writing a little bit each day and doing a lot of thinking in between that makes sense and works the best.
Is there a typical timeline for you for writing a novel, or is each story different?
I would say it usually takes me a year and a half to write the first draft. I've noticed, then the revision. I spend probably a year writing this like a good solid second draft. The difference between me now and then is that I'm more careful about showing my work. I'm wait until it's ready to show it to people more than I used to. I used to be so eager and so excited that I would just maybe show things prematurely, and I've again gotten more patient about getting that feedback.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what kind of first drafter are you? Are you the kind of person who likes to lay down the words very perfectly, or do you like to just get something down knowing that you will be massaging it, tinkering with it later during revision?
I'm sort of in the middle. I don't try to make every sentence perfect, but every day before I write anything new, I revise whatever I did the day before. So I do back up and I do revise as I go and try to make it solid enough that I feel like I have some firm ground under me to continue. If it was really messy and there were big holes, and I don't think I could continue with confidence. So, I do that and I tell myself as I'm doing that don't worry, you can and you will go back and improve this.
Okay, so when you were writing both Sam and Isola at the same time, did that mean it took you 1.5 years plus 1.5 years, so 3 years total to get both done? Or was it actually condensed into 1.5 years?
So they overlapped. So I had already been writing Sam for a while before I started Isola.
Oh,
So
got it.
yeah, so I probably had written. So actually, what I had done was I'd sort of written a first draft of Sam, which was a mess. And I ended up I'm not saying revising, I rewrote the book. And when I was in that process of rewriting the book, that was when I was writing the second book. So they were interleaved together. And I will say that I had the character in the world of Sam, and I had done a huge amount of work on Sam before I started this other book. But I was still trying to do some major problem solving, figuring out, what was going to happen in the second half of Sam.
Okay, so both Sam and Isola have gotten celebrity book club attention. So Isola is, tell me if I've gotten these backwards. Isola is a Reese's book club pick.
Yeah.
And then Sam was Read with Jenna, which is the Today Show. And I'm
Yes.
wondering how, when you get that kind of attention, how does it change your career? And does it change the way that you think about who your audience is?
That's a really good question. I don't really know exactly how it changes my career long term, but I can say that a book club selection like each of those definitely expanded my audience and brought new readers to my work, people who had never heard of me before, although I had written many other books. Suddenly were like, oh, this was recommended, so I'll take a look at Sam. Oh, this might be intriguing because Reese recommended, so in that respect, I think these book clubs shine a light on writers in a really wonderful way. And I definitely am grateful and welcome, people who have just discovered me.
I think as writers, we welcome readers at any stage in our career, right? And then we hope that maybe they'll read some of our past work as well.
Yeah, who knows? Anything can happen. Yeah, exactly.
So I want to go back to the question of readers. And I know that you give advice to aspiring writers, but also to readers as well, just to read widely. And because I know that you love books, I'm wondering, this is a hard question, what are some recent books that you have loved or that have surprised you, delighted you, inspired you?
Well, I'm currently rereading the Iliad and the Odyssey. I've reread the Iliad and now I'm reading the Odyssey in the Lattimore translation. And I've been doing sort of a little bit every day, and that's been like an amazing and sustaining kind of practice. In terms of like much more recent books, I read a lot of nonfiction. I just finished reading this joint biography of Robert Louis Stevenson and his wife Fanny called A Wilder Shore, which is just beautifully written and tells this adventurous story of this marriage, which was, a kind of a late 19th century, turn of the century marriage, but very modern in many ways, and about the creative partnership of these people. I also just read a book about Darwin, Charles Darwin, and the immediate reception of The Origin of Species. The terrible reviews he got from some people, the great reviews he got from other people, the pettiness of the petty jealousy of some of his colleagues.
Wow.
All of that. I just found that absolutely delightful. I think it's called Origin. The story. I can't remember the title, but I can send it to you. And then in terms of fiction, I do try to read a bunch of fiction. And of course, as usual, when anyone asks this question, like everything flies out of my mind, but I will follow up and I'll send you some titles that I've just read.
I love it. I love it. I mean, I think that's when anyone says, hey, you're such a big reader, what have you loved? I feel I sound like I'm not a reader because I can't think of a single book. Absolutely.
It's like, where's my stack of books? It's downstairs.
Exactly. All right. I want to make sure we end on a note about Isola. And what would you like readers to take away from this story? Or do you not go in with the hope that they walk away with any kind of feeling or message?
I think that I want readers to feel that they've been on a journey, that they've been on an adventure, that they have lived through something with my character Marguerite, that they know what it's like to be broken by loss and by isolation, and to also learn how to remake yourself, to feel remade and reborn. And so I guess that's the a little ambitious probably, but that I want readers to feel that like they've gone on that odyssey with her.
That's perfect. I can't wait for everyone to read Isola if they haven't already read it because it's been out for a couple of months. Thank you so much for being on the show, Allegra. This was so much fun.
Thank you for having me.